All right. So this is week 2 of our unmistakable series. We're going to be talking about Exodus 12 and 13, which is Passover and then the moving out of the initial stages of moving out of Egypt for the Israelites. And so just to get to a point where, because we skipped, we're not reading all the way through. We skipped from chapter 4, the end of chapter 4 to the beginning of chapter 12. So there's some territory there that we need to just hit on briefly. So chapter 5 is where and Moses initially goes to Pharaoh and says, "Hey, let my people go." And he says, "No, and now you're going to make bricks without straw." And the people get upset and they're like, "No, we don't like you. We think you should, just go away." And Moses, turns to the Lord and he says, "Oh Lord, why have you mistreated my people? Why did you ever send me? Since I first came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has mistreated this people, and you have done nothing at all to deliver your people." That's the last couple of verses of chapter 5. So then the Lord assures that deliverance will happen. And then the final excuse that Moses makes is in 6:12, where the Lord speaks to Moses and he says, "Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of his land." Moses spoke to the Lord, "The Israelites have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me, poor speaker that I am?" Which is just a retread of his previous, "I'm not a good speaker." Mm-hmm. Now, I was talking with my wife about this, about the chapters 3 and 4 before last Sunday, and she was looking at, she usually reads NIV instead of NRSV, and there was a reference to stuttering, and she was wondering about that, if that's the slow to speak kind of deal, and that's why he was saying, somebody else needs to come. And so there is that sense of what he might be saying as he's slow to speak, is that he stutters. Let's see. So again, that's one of those things where you just kind of, between the translations, they make a choice about how they translate that and what that might mean. So.
Okay.
So Moses speaks, and Lord speaks to Moses and Aaron, give them order regarding the Israelites and Pharaoh, charging them to free the Israelites from the land of Egypt. Then we have this section of genealogy in chapter 6. They love to throw those in just every once in a while to go, "Hey, pay attention here." And then you go to verse 28. On the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, he said to him, "I'm the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that I am speaking to you, all that I'm speaking to you." But Moses said, again, in the present, "Since I'm a poor speaker, why would Pharaoh listen to me? I have made you," Lord says, "I've made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command to you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his land." But here's the kicker that gets most people, that like makes people go, "What?" "But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and I will multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not listen to you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and bring my people, the Israelites, company by company, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment." So there's this hint that it's God who's hardening Pharaoh's heart. And then when you get to the plagues, it's like Pharaoh hardened his heart and didn't do it for the first few, and then towards the latter half of the plagues, it's God hardening Pharaoh's heart again. So there's interplay between that, and I'm sure there have been doctoral dissertations written on whether God hardened Pharaoh's heart or whether Pharaoh hardened Pharaoh's heart, or what all that means, and what does it mean to be hardened of heart. Anyway, so then the plagues start in chapter 7. Water turns to blood. And for the first 3, I think, the Egyptian magicians can perform the same deal. So the water of the Nile turns to blood. Then the frogs come out. The magicians are also able to turn their staff into a snake and do the leprous hand thingy.
Right.
And then frogs, and then gnats, and let's see. And then so this is chapter 8. Verse 18, the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, but they could not. So this is the first one they can't do. And the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. So the magicians see what's going on at this point before Pharaoh does. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Then there's flies. Then there's livestock being diseased. Then there's boils. Then there's thunder and hail, and then after the boils, this is chapter 9, verse 12. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. So that's the shift there. So with the boils, it shifts back to the Lord hardening Pharaoh's heart. So thunder and hail, and then locusts, and then darkness is the 9th plague. And all along the way, it's just the Egyptians who are suffering from these things. The Israelites are not having any of these ill effects. They're not, they don't have the gnats, they don't have the flies, they don't have the locusts, they don't have the darkness, they don't have the thunder and hail, all that kind of stuff. They're always protected. So the land of Goshen is spared from that, which is where the Israelites lived. So then chapter 11 is the warning of the final plague. And Moses says to Pharaoh, this is going to happen if you don't let us go. And he's like, ha, 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 I'm not going to do that. And so he's like, all right, we'll see. And then we get to chapter 12. And this is the only plague that the death of the firstborn, the final plague, is the only plague that requires preparation on the part of the Israelites. So they have to, it gets tied up to Passover. And so they have to do all this preparation to be ready to go. So as chapter 12 opens, the Lord says, this month shall mark for you the beginning of months. So it becomes a new year. And he says, it shall be the first month of the year for you. On the 10th of the month, you get a lamb or a goat that's a year old, with no blemishes, no imperfections, and you bring it to your house, and it's your pet for 4 days. And on the 14th day, there was one scholar who said that you have it for 4 days, so that if you could do a thorough check of the lamb or the goat, and if you found any imperfections, you still had time to go get another one. I've also heard it that it was there for 4 days so that your kids would fall in love with it and be sad when you had to kill it and eat it. I was like, okay, well, all right.
Oh, gosh.
I know, right? Anyway, I don't know which of those is true, if either one of them are true. But on the 14th day, then as a whole congregation, you slaughter the lambs at twilight. And you take some of the blood and you put it on the doorposts and on the lintel. So the doorposts go this way and the lintel goes this way. And you roast the lamb over fire, unleavened bread, bitter herbs. Don't eat it raw or boiled. And then if anything's left over, burn it with fire and don't eat it the next day. And then there's in verse 11 of chapter 12, you see, this is how you eat it. Loins girded, sandals on your feet, staff in your hand, and hurriedly. And so there's this, it's a moment of preparation where God's saying at any moment in time, Pharaoh is going to let you go and you need to be ready. And so, and he says, the blood will be a sign for you on your houses where you live, and I see the blood and I will pass over you. No plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Then there's this section between 14 and 20 that is talking about unleavened bread and yeast and things like that. And then verse 21. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. Verse 21 starts another section of describing the instructions for celebrating Passover. This time it's not God to Moses, but Moses to the elders of Israel. And so he has a couple of little clarifications that's what I call them, is clarifications to him. So he says that you take hyssop, a bunch of hyssop, which is a branch of a tree, and you dip it in the blood which is in the basin. And so there's this, you kind of have to, read into that when you cut the throat of the lamb, that blood has to go somewhere. And so in the sacrificial system that the Jews set up, it is, there's always a basin to catch the blood. And so they slit the throat, and the blood pours out, because you can't eat the blood because the blood is life. You can't do that. So it gets poured into this bowl, or gets drained into the bowl, and you take that, and that's what you dip the hyssop in, and then that's what you swipe onto the door. So there's just a little bit of clarification there. And then he says, none of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning. This isn't in the first section. But Moses says, once the door is closed, once the blood has been smeared on the door and it's been closed, it stays closed until morning. And he says, for the Lord will pass through to strike down the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over that door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you down. So it's, obviously most people have seen, the Ten Commandments, and there's this scene at the end of the movie, or towards the end of the movie. And there's, I can just sense, every time I watch it, I sense like there's as soon as the Egyptians start wailing, as the little green cloud or whatever starts going through the countryside, there's this like desire to run out the door, where Moses's family is gathered. They're like, they hear it, and they're like, what is going on? And there's like this desire to run out the door to see what's going on. And that's like the last thing that they're supposed to do, because if they do that, then in it comes. And anyway, I think it's human nature to run to people who are wailing, and just that empathetic kind of situation. So I just wonder if like the door was barred on the inside that evening. I don't know. That's purely speculation. That is, yeah.
Oh, you weren't there?
No, I wasn't. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so the Israelites did just as the Lord had commanded to Moses and Aaron. And so then we have the 10th plague coming. This is 12, starting in verse 29, which starts the sermon text. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And that's the poetic way of saying everybody in Egypt, from the highest to the lowest. Then Pharaoh arose, and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. They summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, rise up, go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you said, take your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing on me too. So there's that wailing from the Egyptians rises all the way to Pharaoh. And basically they're like, we got to get these people out. And so he's finally turned the corner, and he says, okay, go. And then, as you see, again, turn to 33, the Egyptians urged the people to hasten their departure from the land. They're like, get out, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened. But wait a minute, they didn't have any leaven, so why would it be leavened? But that's another discussion for another time. With their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks and their shoulders, Israelites had done as Moses had told them, and they asked the Egyptians for jewelry of silver and gold and for clothing, and the Lord had given people favor in their sight. So they let them have whatever they asked for. And so they plundered the Egyptians. I mean, they just kind of, there's this sort of this sense that they're just like walking along the streets going, hey, give me your gold and jewelry and some clothing. And they're like, sure, whatever it takes to get you out of here. So they go from Ramses to Succoth, 600,000 men besides children, livestock, herds, flocks. They baked unleavened cakes. It was not leavened because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. That line will come in handy in about 2 chapters when we get to manna. And we get to chapter 16 and they're like, what are we going to eat?
Okay.
So they had not prepared any provisions. So then it's 430 years. On the very day, at the end of 430 years, they walked out. That night, that was for the Lord a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is a vigil to be kept for the Lord by all the Israelites throughout their generations. And then there's some directions for the Passover, that you have to be circumcised. The males have to be circumcised. No foreigners can eat it. Eaten in one house. Don't break any of its bones. That will come in handy later when we get to Jesus. And the whole congregation of Israel shall celebrate it. And if an alien wants to celebrate Passover, they have all of his males shall be circumcised. And they did as the Lord commanded. And that very day they were brought out from the land of Egypt. 13, there's the consecration, starts with the consecration of the firstborn, which gets picked up again in verse 11. And so we'll jump to that in a minute. Then there's the details of the festival of unleavened bread. So there's two distinct celebrations that happen back to back. There's Passover, which is 1415 Nisan, which is the name of the month now. It's actually listed as Abib in 13:4. That's the ancient name for the first month of the year is Abib. It was changed later to Nisan, which is actually derivative from Assyrian. So there you go. But the name of the month now is known as Nisan. And so on the 14th day, 14 and 15, because Passover takes place at midnight, it's in the middle of that transition from the 14th to the 15th. So that's important when it comes to dating it each year and looking at how it lines up on the Gregorian calendar.
Okay.
And every year that Christian Easter happens before Passover, all the Jews are like, how can you have the celebration of Passover before Passover actually started? When our Easter is in March, they're like, Passover isn't like for 2 more weeks. How can you have the celebration of Passover? Anyway.
Huh.
So it's just the function of the different calendars. But anyway, so there's Passover, and then immediately on the heels of that, there's the Festival of the Unleavened Bread, which is a 7-day festival. So there you go. But they're 2 different things. They happen right next to each other, but they're 2 different things. And then there's the consecration of the firstborn, starting in verse 11, and says when the Lord. So this is sort of forward looking. Says when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your ancestors, as he's given it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your livestock that are males shall be the Lord's, but every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. Every firstborn male among your children you shall redeem. When in the future your child asks you, what does this mean? You shall answer, by strength of hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from human firstborn to the firstborn of animals. Therefore, I sacrifice to the Lord every male that first opens the womb, but every firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall serve as a sign on your hand and as an emblem on your forehead, that by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. So there's because it for me, it's talking about how, because all the firstborn of Egypt were the casualties of the 10th plague, now all the firstborn of Israel will be set apart and set aside for the work of the Lord and holy unto the Lord. And so this comes into play again in the New Testament when we see, or even later, well, you can even just go a little bit later in the Old Testament, and like Samuel, he was a firstborn son, and Hannah had prayed for her son, and she told God that if he would give her a son, she would dedicate him to the Lord's service. And so as soon as Samuel is born, she weaned him and then sent him off, or took him to the temple, and he became a helper in the temple, and eventually becomes a prophet. So it's that kind of deal. But there are sacrifices that you make to redeem the firstborn of your children, and that's that Luke 2 reference is where Mary and Joseph go, and they make the sacrifice for their firstborn son, or they make the offering for their firstborn son, because in the Passover story it was the lamb that was sacrificed, and then you just kind of get into all sorts of really cool stuff between Jesus and Passover, and it's
Yeah, and they had to kill a lamb in order to redeem the donkey.
Yeah.
And I guess we're donkeys. And thankfully he redeemed us.
And didn't break our necks.
Didn't break our neck. Not yet anyway.
Not yet anyway. That's right.
We still have a chance.
Right. All right. So that's all of the text for this week. So let's let me flip over to my questions. I put in there the optional reading of 7:14 to 11:10 about the first 9 plagues. Talked a little bit about the first 9 plagues don't take place without much of Israel doing much of anything to get ready. 10th plague is altogether different. And so just going through those verses there in 12:1 to 13 to see what the specific instructions are. And then question 2 is about the additional instructions from Moses and the people's response. So those are all fairly straightforward. Question 3 is, what is Pharaoh's response to the 10th plague? How is this similar and different than Pharaoh's previous responses to the plagues? So Pharaoh's response to the 10th plague is, again, it's in 12, and it's verses 31 and 32. And he summons Moses and Aaron in the night, said, "Rise up, go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you said. Take your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone, and bring a blessing on me too." So the way that I look at it, it's similar to some of his other responses, particularly the later plagues, like 7, 8, and 9, where he sort of had this softening, and he's like, "Oh, okay, you can go a little bit," but then he changes his mind. Then his heart is hardened. His heart is hardened, and then he calls him back. And he says, "No, don't go anywhere." So there's this sense that it's like, Yeah, they probably, Moses and Aaron probably were like a little cautious at this. Like, he said this before, but maybe this is different. And again, they're going on the fact, they're going with the assurance that, they're going to be delivered. They've done all the work, all the preparation, all the people are ready. So I think they're going with, all right, this is happening. And they basically just take off. I mean, they just, all right, he said go, so we're going. And again, because everybody got ready, they had their belt tied around their waist, they had their sandals on, they had their staff in their hand, they'd already eaten dinner, they'd gotten rid of the leftovers if there were any. And so as soon as Moses says go, I just see this mass of people just like whoosh, exiting. And then, all the Egyptians are like, here, take our stuff, please, and it's just this sea of humanity moving out of Egypt. So it's different in that he doesn't call them back. He doesn't change his mind. His heart isn't re-hardened as he says this. It will be, but it's not in this moment. It'll be too late by the time his heart is hardened again. So it's similar in that they've heard this a little bit before, but it's different in that he's not immediately hardened his heart again, and he allows them to go, and the people just go. So the Egyptians respond by urging them. Verse 33 says, they urge the people to hasten their departure from the land, for they said, we shall all be dead. So, and then they give them whatever they ask for, because the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So the people are like, we're done with y'all, please go. That's question 4. All right. Question 5. The day of Passover has become the celebration of the miraculous work of God to deliver the Israelites out of the hands of the Egyptians. It is a day of remembrance for you, a festival to the Lord, a perpetual ordinance. That's from 12:14. What 2 additional remembrances are associated with Passover? And so you jump to 13, and you see that the festival of unleavened bread is there, as well as the consecration of the firstborn. So those 2 things are connected to and associated with Passover. Again, the festival of unleavened bread is a different festival than Passover. And
it comes right after it.
It comes right after it, yeah. And then the consecration of the firstborn is, again, it's a forward-looking moment here, because it says, when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites. So when you enter the promised land, here's what you're going to do. So that's number 5. Number 6 says, how are future generations of Israelites supposed to learn about the significance and meaning of these remembrances and observances? And it is that their parents are supposed to are supposed to tell them. And if anybody in your classes have ever been to a Jewish Seder, you see this enacted in it. So what happens is that, obviously there's singing, and there's Torah portions that are read, and the remembrance of the Passover. And then at one point, a child is supposed to either get up from the table where they're sitting for dinner, or come into the room at some level and ask the question of, why do we celebrate this? Why do we celebrate this night this way? And then the adults, the older generation is supposed to tell them, because the Lord delivered us out of Egypt and out of slavery, and that's how they learn. And so, so anyway, if you go to a Seder, a Seder meal, you will see it enacted, and I've seen it. I've seen it, and it's really cool. But that's the instructions as to that. When they ask, why do we do this? Then the answer is because the Lord delivered us out of Egypt. And this sort of this responsibility of the current generation to tell the next generation the answer to why questions when it comes to God's working in the life of the people comes up over and over again. So when the Israelites cross over the Jordan into the promised land, there's the 12 stones that they take from the bottom representing the 12 tribes, and they set it as a memorial. And there's the instructions to anytime your children ask, why are these stones here? You tell them about what the Lord did as they crossed the Jordan River. So it comes up over and over. Yep, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and in a pre-literate culture, these oral, traditions, these passing these stories down from generation to generation is how those stories stayed alive until they could be written down. All right. Number 7, why do you think Passover happens as the first festival in the new year? This is a fun one for people to think about. So,
I would think it would help them remember that God is their Lord, and they need to be thankful to Him for everything, and to keep that mindset as they go through the coming year. That's my guess.
Sure. No, there's yes. That I think that's the idea is that that Passover. Again, this is just me. Passover is this amazing fresh start for the Israelites. So why wouldn't it be happening at the beginning of the year? I mean, that's the time of, in our cycle of living, January 1st is it's this fresh start for everything, new calendar, new year, new week, new, all that kind of stuff, lots of potential ahead of you. So, so Passover being this deliverance from what was past, and from that to the new possibility of the promised land, seems to me to fit really well as the new year.
To your point, absolutely.
So I think it's a great deal. So
excuse me, you can keep talking, I can hear you fine, I'm not that far away.
Okay, very good. So having the Passover start at the first of the year just reminds the people of the fresh start that they get.
I'm sorry. Now I got a doorbell. So.
Oh goodness.
And Gail's gone. I'll be right back as quick as I can.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So question 8 is about significance of the unleavened bread. Was leaven or yeast, and why would God want people to remove it from their houses? How does Jesus talk about leaven or yeast in the Gospels? So, I'm going to hang for Gary to come back because he wanted to specifically address this question. So, give us just a minute. You can fast forward until Gary comes back onto the screen.
Sorry, pest control guy's here and she's going crazy wanting to play with him, I guess.
No problem. Okay. So question 8 is about unleavened bread and yeast. And so I wanted to make sure you were back for that one.
Thank you.
I told everybody they could fast forward until we got here.
Okay.
So the significance of unleavened bread, what's leaven or yeast, and why would God want people to remove it from their houses? And then how does Jesus talk about leaven and yeast in the gospel? So 2 parts. So the initial significance, according to the text, is that you,
Bless you.
thank you. That the people, this is 12, 19. For 7 days, no leaven shall be found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether an alien or native in the land. So this is in regards to the festival of unleavened bread. Oh, well, all right. But the unleavened bread for Passover is related to the festival of unleavened bread. But the significance of it is that, as it says, when they leave, this is 12:34, says, the people took their dough before it was leavened with their kneading bowls, wrapped it up in their cloaks on their shoulders. And so they had to leave in such a hurry that the bread didn't have time to rise. So there's sort of, it feels like there's a couple of timelines sort of being mashed together here. One being the original context where they were waiting for they were hunkered down on that original Passover night. And then as they leave, they have to leave so quickly that the bread doesn't have time to rise. And they go out, and so it's unleavened. But then there's the stream of this festival of unleavened bread. And so the Lord says, okay, you need to get rid of all the leaven, you need to get rid of all the yeast and not have it in your house for 7 days. And then anybody who eats it gets cut off. So it seems like there's a couple things coming together here, but the original significance is that they didn't have time. They had to leave in such a hurry, they didn't have time for the bread to rise. And so it stays flat, basically. So that gives rise to matzah, which is the unleavened bread.
Okay, so in this case, yeast isn't a symbol like a rock or a lamb or a serpent or a scorpion. It's not a symbol so much as it is just a natural fact that's
right.
what.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the original context, no, it was just the stuff that makes bread go puffy. And so that's the original idea, is that they had to leave in such a hurry that it didn't have time to rise, so it was all flat. It was the best they could do. Now, when you get to the idea of God asking and wanting people to remove it from their houses, number one, it's a reminder of the original Passover. To have unleavened bread, it's a reminder of that original Passover. And it's just a remembrance of, we had to leave in a hurry, so we're going to eat what our ancestors ate for 7 days. But then when we get to the New Testament and the Gospels, Jesus talks about leaven and yeast in a different way. He talks about it in a symbolic way. He talks about, he utilizes the fact that yeast makes things rise and puff up. And so he talks about, so let's go to, Matthew 13:33 says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. So this is a positive use of yeast and leaven. He said, because he's comparing it to the kingdom of heaven. So he says, the kingdom of heaven is this force that gets into every nook and cranny of something and expands it. This is
Right.
a positive use of yeast and leaven. But if you go to 16:5-12, you see a negative use of the word yeast. So when the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." They said to one another, "Is it because we have brought no bread?" And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, "You have little faith. Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How could you fail to perceive that I was not speaking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So this again, the Pharisees and Sadducees were different Jewish sects that were attempting to live faithfully according to the Torah in different ways. They had, slightly different religious beliefs when it came down to sort of some of the minutia of things, but they both came up against Jesus at different places and different times in the Gospels. And Jesus is telling his disciples that their teaching is like yeast. And again, it gets into the nooks and the crannies and begins to puff up things, begins to swell and make things larger. And oftentimes those larger things are actually inconsequential things. Like, there's a different point where Jesus will talk about how, woe to you Pharisees who tithe their mint and their dill or whatever, but they fail to attend to things like justice and mercy. So there's the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees often get in the way of the work of the kingdom of God.
Got you.
So
thank you. That helped a lot.
Good. Glad I could provide some clarity there. Okay. Number 9. Why do you think God ties together the Passover and the consecration of the firstborn? Talked a little bit about this earlier, and how the firstborn in Egypt were, the victims were the ones who died on Passover night, and the first, the 1-year-old lambs were the ones who were the cost for the people to leave Egypt. So then the firstborn, the ones that open the womb of the Israelites, are the ones who are set aside. They're consecrated for the Lord going forward. And then in Numbers 18 and Luke 2, you see some of the regulations around what those sacrifices are to redeem the firstborns. So you can see those there. All right. Then Exodus 12:43-50. And here's where we get into one of my favorite topics, circumcision. So what does God require of every male who wants to participate in the Passover? It's to be circumcised, whether they're slave or whether they're a free man, whether if they're an alien, then every male in that household has to be circumcised, and then they will be regarded as native. And then, but the thing is that no uncircumcised person, and at this point in time, they didn't circumcise females, so they shall eat of it. So there shall be one law for the native and one for the alien that resides among you. So the significance of circumcision for the Israelites is the Abraham covenant. It's that God said, you and all of your sons will have this mark that sets you apart as my people. So that's in Genesis 17. And let's see, Deuteronomy 30, verse 6 says, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, in order that you may live. So again, circumcision has this dual meaning. There's a physical circumcision and there's a spiritual circumcision. And that duality shows up even in the Old Testament. And then Romans 4, after Acts, Romans 4, Romans 4:11 says, he received the sign of circumcision. This is Abraham. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the ancestor of all who believe without being circumcised, and who thus have righteousness reckoned to them. And then it goes on to say, and likewise the ancestor of the circumcised, who are not only circumcised, but who also follow the example of the faith that our ancestor Abraham had before he was circumcised. So again, it ties the people back to Abraham, who again is named in the conversation that Moses has with God about who he is. I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob. So there's that connection back. And then for us today, those of us who are part of the new covenant, Romans 2:28 and 29 says, for a person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is true circumcision something external and physical. Rather, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and a real circumcision is a matter of the heart. It is spiritual and not literal. Such a person receives praise not from others but from God. So again, the wrestling with the duality of physical and spiritual circumcision. Colossians 2:11 to 14. Philippians and Colossians 2:11. In him, so in Christ, also you were circumcised with a spiritual circumcision, there it is again, by putting off the body of the flesh in the circumcision of Christ. When you were buried with him in baptism, you were also raised with him through faith in the power of God who raised him from the dead. And when you were dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive together with him when he forgave us all our trespasses, erasing the record that stood against us with its legal demands. He set this aside, nailing it to the cross. So, and again, Paul's teaching that we see throughout his letters and in Acts as well is that physical circumcision is not a requirement to be like the whole you got to be a Jew first before you can become a Christian argument that Paul debunks. And so he said that, he's saying that spiritual, a circumcision of the heart is the matter at hand rather than a physical circumcision. So there you go. All right. That gets us through all the questions on the study guide. What other questions might you have?
I don't think I have any other questions. I will make a comment as I was reading through this. I came across 12, is it 12? Yeah, 12:46.
Okay.
Do not break any of the bones.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me going. I looked at Psalm 34:20.
Yep.
Because it talks about that. And then of course, when you get into the New Testament at the crucifixion,
mm-hmm.
He died before they could break any of his bones. So they just got him in the side instead.
Yep.
So that was just, I love the connectivity of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So just a comment, not a question.
No, that's, especially when you read the Gospel of John, the connection of the very deliberate connection of Jesus as the Paschal lamb, as the Passover lamb, is apparent through the entire passion narrative. I mean, from the way that he comes into Jerusalem to the way that he is treated, you know, that he's the blameless one, that, you know, yeah, they didn't break any of his bones, that he's the, you know, that he's the one who whose blood is poured out across what you could, you know, I mean, those doorposts were made of wood, and so was the cross, and so his blood spilled there is what pays, you know, for freedom. And I mean, I mean, it's all over the place, and it's fantastic.
Yes, it is.
So,
Yes, it is.
Um,
So, no, I don't guess I have any other questions.
okay, very good, very good. All righty, well, then I guess we will be back together again next week, and we'll talk
I
about,
appreciate that.
yeah, sure, no, we'll talk about 16 and 17 next week. And,
Okay.
crossing the Red Sea, or are we crossing the Red Sea next week? I don't know. No, we're doing manna and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, doing manna and water from the rock. So,
And
also-
shame on Moses for not following the orders.
well, he did it right this time. Second
Oh,
time.
it's the next time. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it cost them everything. Anyway, all right, Gary,
All right.
appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You do the same.
Yeah.